Frank, welcome to my kitchen. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just move your shield down a bit?
Down a little bit.
Otherwise the camera doesn't get to see your face. And
My
that's
lovely, beautiful face. How's that?
That's beautiful. Everyone who comes on the show, I get a present for, but I've left yours in the fridge. Hold on a second.
This makes me excited about what kind of present it might be. Ooh.
Now, I've got slight anxiety about this present. I get a lot of anxiety about my presents. So often I buy people bottles of wine, and that's really easy.
Yeah.
Buy someone a bottle of wine, they go, yeah, that's great, because you can't complain. Yeah. And I got bored, and the listeners started going, God, you buy everyone a bottle of wine. So I've started looking for things for different. This is it's wrapped, so it must be good.
Okay.
But this isn't a beer, so I've got a bit of anxiety about it because it's only a beer.
Okay. No, but I mean, a beer is a beer.
If you open it, because it's just, and I just thought, it's kind of a posh beer. And I thought, do you like beer?
I do like beer. Tell me about this beer.
I know nothing about it. I just walked in the shop and it looked like a big bottle, but I've got anxiety because it's not as expensive as a bottle of wine, you know.
I'm probably not going to drink it right now.
No, you don't have to drink it right now.
Aged in oak foudre.
There you go.
For 9 months. That sounds lovely. Thank you so much.
Well, pleasure. I hope.
Wonderful.
I hope you like that.
That will go down well. Probably this evening.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Where have you been recently? Have you been touring?
I have. I just got back from. I had a tour that ended in Quebec on Monday last, so just over a week ago. And now I've got pit stop at home, and then I'm going on tour again on Sunday.
Where are you going? Chicago, and then Kalamazoo.
Where's
that?
It's in Michigan. I always want to say bless you after people say Kalamazoo. It's actually a really fun town. It's sort of near Detroit. We've played there before and had a great time, so I'm heading back.
Do you like touring?
I love it. It's the thing that I've done with my adult life, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
how many gigs are you on at the moment?
2,112, I think. And the thing is, I only know this. I do keep a list that's on my website. Everybody thinks I'm like completely insanely OCD and know the numbers off the top of my head. I don't. I tend to write them on the set list on the day. So I've generally got the last one in my head.
Right.
So it's around that. And that's solo shows. I did more with other bands as well. And actually, so the end of next month, mid-August, 20th of August or so, is my 20th anniversary of my first tour.
Hey.
So, yeah, long
in the tooth. Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I do. It changes. It has changed over time. Partly, there are things you can do in your 20s that you can't do in your 30s, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of bands when you start out touring, when you're kind of young and excited about it, treat touring as like this traveling endless stag do, if you see what I mean. And I did do that for a time, but you can't do that forever. And you know, these days, like I was looking back to some old tour dates. Back in 2007, we used to do like 24 shows in a row without a day off. If I do 3 now, I'm exhausted. You know what I mean? But also these days, I don't generally tend to sleep on the floor anymore. I generally get a bed.
Yeah, I used to tour with bands. I was a swag man. I used to sell merch, and so I've got an idea of what it's like. And what's interesting about it is I decided it wasn't a career for me because it's. People won't feel sorry for you, but it's bloody hard work touring.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think that musicians complaining about touring is slightly redundant because no one makes you do it at the end of the day. But at the same time, it is for some people and not for others. Even that first tour I did 20 years ago, about 12 of us went on the tour, and when we got home, 6 of us were like, I'm never, ever doing that again. That was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And it was 2 weeks around the UK.
When I was producing Soccer M, I was in charge of booking the guests, not literally booking them, but saying who was coming on. So often we'd have musicians pull out because they were burnt out. And all that meant was they'd been on tour and they'd done the classic. They were always new bands because that's what Soccer M had a lot of. And it was always that classic thing. We're on tour, we're going to drink every night. There's only so many nights you can drink unless you're Lemmy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, particularly nowadays, one of the things that always makes me laugh, that like younger kids who come to my shows, quite a few of them have this image of what Backstage is like, and I think in their head it's this like Elysian field of like booze and women and this kind of thing, and it's like, it's not that. It's generally people doing stretches and FaceTime. That's Backstage, actually.
Apart from the roadies who just rock and roll.
They do, although it's interesting to say that. The word roadie is a trick question.
Why?
And what I mean by that is that no one in the music industry's job description is roadie.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? It's like you might be guitar tech, stage manager, swag man, whatever you might be.
Yeah.
But it's like, but I get every now and again people kind of go, oh, I want to be a roadie. And I'm like, well, okay, first port of call on that journey is stopping using the word roadie. Do you know what I mean? It's not a word that people use. But even my crew are pretty chilled out these days.
Go on.
I was going to say the day before a day off is called Roadie Friday.
Right.
Because that's the night when the crew can drink because they don't have anything to do the next day. And my crew do then get on it. On those occasions, and the morning of a day off is usually a little bit like the aftermath of the First World War, and sort of barren trenches and dead bodies everywhere. Or the other name for it is Crew Year's Eve. I quite like that.
Nice, yeah, like that.
Yeah.
What do you think of do you sell a lot of swag?
We do, yeah. I have the wonderful Yovka is my merch person. She's based in Chicago. We do. In fact, in my early years, I used to sell my own merch for years, so I'm very familiar with the back end of a merch table.
What, you would go back after the gig and sell it?
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
Partly because I didn't have the money to pay anyone to do it for me.
Yeah.
But also because it was a really cool sort of philosophical demonstration of because without getting overly heavy about this now, but like, you know, growing up with punk rock and stuff, I don't believe in the idea of musicians being removed from the people who listen to music. You know, music should be a conversation among equals. And it was really cool, particularly when I was a support act. You get up, you play for half an hour, and then 5 minutes later you're behind the merch table selling your t-shirts.
Yeah.
And it's a really simple way of showing people you don't hold yourself above them. Do you know what I mean? Definitely,
yeah. That's a good attitude to have. Just going back to the roadies or whatever you call them. What always used to amuse me was with the stars I used to go, or the bands or whoever I used to go on tour with. They would always sort of drag themselves out of bed. They would do their sound check, do their gig, and then they would get hammered. The road crew or the roadies or whatever, they used to get absolutely hammered. Then they'd be up at 6 in the morning.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Putting lighting rigs up and stuff. I don't know how they did it. There's quite a bit of drugs in rock and roll as well. I don't know if you've noticed that, Frank.
There can be. I'm not going to mention a name, but there is a certain member of my crew who's one of the older members of the crew who mystifies me from a medical point of view because he just gets on it harder than everybody else, and he's always up at 9 a.m. and he's bright and early and he's doing his job and it's no problem. I remember there was one occasion we did a festival in Germany and he and I got wasted together, and the next morning I was genuinely like, we're going to have to cancel the rest of the tour. I want to kill myself. This is a complete disaster. And he was like, I've been up for about 3 hours just rigging and it's all fine.
The job of a swag man in my day as well was you were a bank as well, because as we toured around Europe, the money would change everywhere you went. Yeah. Now it's all euros everywhere.
Yeah,
but
it's easier.
Yeah. So and the lovely way rock and roll worked is they'd call them shitters. So they come and say, "Can you give me some shitters? Here's 50 shitters. Can you change it up for some more shitters so I can go out and buy?" And that's basically. And
we call them shekels and groats.
All right. Okay. Yeah. This it's changed.
Yeah.
It's much nicer now.
It's
much nicer now. No, it's really cool, and there was no mobile phones in those days either.
Yeah.
And the great thing, I always remember my favourite thing was all the swag men had a little sort of thing where we'd all leave messages for each other on the walls of all the venues.
Yeah.
Because we knew each other in the circuit. I didn't do it for that long because it just burnt me out. But I was burnt out as a swag man.
Well, there you go. I just about toured before kind of like the internet and mobile phones and stuff became an integral part of it. And one of the things I always love on that first tour I did 20 years ago, because this is sort of pre-sat nav and that kind of thing, and so you'd have an A to Z of the city you're in. And a tip I got given by an older friend of mine before the tour, which we used successfully twice, was if you can't find the venue, drive to the shit end of town and ask someone in a leather jacket. And it works.
It is true,
yeah,
isn't it?
And you find there's some old geezer wandering around in a leather jacket with like an earring, and you're like, "Excuse me, mate, have you seen the Dog and Bucket?" And he'd be like, "Actually, yes, I have. It's over there."
The cool thing about touring, though, is you get to see millions of different cities and places. The problem is you can get sucked into just staying at the venue constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. You see a lot of car parks and airports.
Yeah. Do you go and try and...
I do my best. Ben, who's a guitar player in my live band, is amazing at this. He's always up at the crack of dawn and has like an itinerary of the places you should see in this given city, and he does that kind of thing. I have a bit more to do in terms of like press and radio sessions and that kind of business. I do my best. We just did a 7-night stand in Boston recently, which was great because we all got like Airbnb apartments, and I actually got to know Boston. I've been there a million times, but it was the first time I've done the tourist stuff, and it was great.
When you tour and you choose a band, do you have to? Having been on the tours, people don't get on very well after a while. Do you, when you're selecting people to play with you, do you select them on whether you're going to be able to get on with them for months on a time as well as their ability?
Yeah, that's an important part of it. I mean, actually, so the band that I play with has been a solid lineup for just about 10 years now, actually. It took a while to get it right at the beginning. We had an endless parade of keyboard players of various different quality and personal social skills and all the rest of it. But it's funny, like now that we've been touring this long as a band, everybody's kind of just in it for the long haul now. Do you know what I mean? Everyone, I'm quite proud of this. You know, people pay their mortgages off the back of what they get paid touring with me, and we've been through thick and thin, and it's that thing where you reach a point where it's more like a family. Like, we have our arguments from time to time, but everybody knows that we're doing this for the foreseeable.
How does it work when you write? Do you write with them or just on your own?
I tend to write on my own, and then we arrange the songs together. So I'll come into a rehearsal, or usually sound check actually, and I've got, you know, 2 chord sequences and the lyrics and an idea for the structure, and then my drummer will start messing around underneath it, and sometimes I go, yes, that's perfect, and sometimes I go, please stop trying to play like you're in a prog band. Because, and I say this with all due respect, Nigel, my drummer, is one of the best drummers in the world, but he is a massive prog fan, and that is a clash we've had over the years, is that he'll start something and I'll be like, that's a little bit Marillion for my taste. You know, my taste was always a little bit more the Clash. You know what I mean?
God, that's really hard though, isn't it, to massage egos?
It is, but again, I mean, we definitely went through some really tough periods with that. But I think that now, again, we're sort of at a point now where, I mean, it's actually really helpful. Quite a lot of the guys in my bands have their own side projects that they do. Yeah. And that gives them a creative outlet to be in charge and to make all the decisions. So, which means that when they come back to me arranging my songs with them, they will follow direction.
Yeah, well, you've got one leader. It's the same which happens in TV.
Yeah.
Because you've got production, and they go, we've got this item, and then you go, no, I don't want to do it, and you know, and the egos get
of course it does.
No, it's a brilliant idea. You're doing it. No, I don't want to do it. It's kind of one of those. How did it all start for you then? Iron Maiden record, I read.
Iron Maiden record, yeah, that was a big part of it. My mum and dad listened to sort of classical music and church music and stuff like that. And
do you love classical music now?
I've got more into it as I got older. When I was a kid, initially it didn't do anything for me, and then basically what happened was within the space of a couple of months, 2 things happened. First of all, I heard an Iron Maiden record, and actually, full disclosure here, I was into Games Workshop, you know what I mean, like Orcs and Goblins and that business. Yeah, this is when I'm 10, right? And
I don't know what to make of that. Is that that's
well, I've always had this thing, like at one point when I'm kind of like wealthy and idle, I might get back into it again. I don't know whether that's realistic, but like I was really into that, and I was at a mate's house playing that, and his older brother had an Iron Maiden poster on the wall, and I thought it was really cool because it's a zombie, you know, and he said, oh, that's a band. And it had never occurred to me that music could be cool like that, because the only music I knew was what my parents listened to.
Yeah.
So I went and got a copy of Killers on cassette from our price, and everything changed. And then a couple of months later, the Freddie Mercury tribute concert from Wembley Stadium was broadcast live on the TV, and me and my sister taped the whole thing and watched it with our faces like right up against the telly. And you know, on the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, you had like Guns N' Roses, Metallica, Spinal Tap, of course, like Zeppelin, Sabbath, and then loads of Queen and all this kind of thing. And it was just like, oh my God, what the fuck is all of this? So it was great.
See, I don't get that music at all, really. But I know when something hits you. For me, it was Ska.
Right, yeah.
And that feeling when something hits you. So for me, it was seeing Madness on Top of the Pops, and then getting into the specials and stuff.
Right, yeah.
And then you just... It just takes over your life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And that's all you think about. It's that really bizarre thing.
And I think it's also... So I am going somewhere relevant with this.
Yeah, go on.
Like one of my pet hates in life is kind of older people in the music industry declaring every now and again that rock is dead or something like this, or you know, the rock's run out of ideas. And what people have done when they say that is they've confused themselves with music. And the thing is, of course, nothing's ever going to hit any of us like it did when we were 16. And it is unrealistic to think that will happen. Every now and again, in fact, quick shout out, the other day in Boston, we played a show, and one of the opening acts was a band called War on Women, who are a super anarcho-feminist punk band. And watching them, I felt a bit like I was 16 again.
Did you say War on Women?
Yeah, War on Women. Like insanely heavy, aggressive, anarcho female fronted crust punk kind of stuff, which I love that kind of stuff anyway. They were so good, it just absolutely blew my mind. I was just like sat speechless on the side of the stage, just being like, this is my new favorite band. But it reminded me of those moments. I remember I went to my first like UK hardcore punk show when I was about 17, and I saw a band called Knuckle Dust, and I'd seen a bunch of American hardcore bands before that, which I quite liked, but Knuckle Dust was from London.
Which ones? I toured with a band called Prong. Do you know that?
Oh yeah, I know Prong. Yeah.
I used to
Great
do that.
band.
Yeah, I did their merch. So
Didn't they did Snap Your Fingers, Snap Your Neck? Was that? I'm pretty sure that was a Prong song.
But the first gig I did with them, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of shouting.
Yeah. That's the stuff I grew up with, man.
Right, and so I'm like, by the end of it, you're like, yeah, I can hear the tune. It's good. It's like,
yeah.
But I really got into them in the end.
That physicality.
Prove You Wrong was their album I was touring with.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I remember I saw this band Knuckle Dust, right? And they were from London, and they sung about London. And it's like I'd enjoyed hardcore before that, but when I saw them, it was like, it's the cliche, I know, but it was like they were speaking to me about my life. And I was in the pit going for it.
See, that's why I like the Specials and Madness and stuff, is that lyrically it was about me and growing up, and how politically with a lot with the Specials and Madness about even baggy trousers and stuff like that. So what's metal music? What's their lyrically? Because I honestly don't know.
So I mean, a lot of metal stuff is quite a lot. I mean, I made an have a variety of lyrical subjects, should we say? They're famous for their history songs, which are often kind of endearingly clunky, should we say. There's a song of theirs called Alexander the Great, which features the lyric, at one point he goes, in 333 BC, he defeated King Darius again. And it's just kind of like, wow, poetry? No? Okay. But the thing, I mean, I loved metal for a time, but then punk rock was the thing that really grabbed me. And there's a lot of continuity between stuff like the Specials of Madness in terms of lyrics and stuff like The Clash. And in particular, early 80s American hardcore was the thing I fell desperately in love with. So Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, that kind of business. That's what really grabbed me. And what I loved about it is like there's a ferocity to Black Flag, which in my humble opinion, none of the British punk bands ever quite hit that level of pure direct rage. And you know, I was 16. And
rage at what? Just rage at
everything.
Society.
What have you got? Yeah. You know, I mean, historically speaking, a lot of those bands were kind of like anti-Reagan bands or whatever. But it wasn't just about that. It was Black Flag wrote about being a kind of suburban kid who was just sort of pissed off at boring suburban society. Police Story opens with the line, it's not my imagination, I've got a gun in my back. And it's all about how their shows used to get shut down by the LAPD all the time. And they were genuinely fighting a running battle with the cops as a band. And it's just, it's utterly raw and vicious, and I love it.
A bit like the hip-hop scene.
Yeah, I mean, an earlier version of, yeah. And obviously it's white suburban kids, which is a different sociological thing to what NWA were dealing with or whatever, obviously. But nevertheless, there was a thing. We played the Hollywood Palladium the other day, and I was very excited because the front cover photograph of Henry Rollins' memoirs, and he was the singer in Black Flag, is a picture of the outside of the Hollywood Palladium when it got surrounded by the riot police and they beat the crap out of 3,000 kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
The question I've asked recently to people, so I might as well do it now to my guests, is have you ever identified as anything? Have you ever said you were something? Johnny Vegas wanted to be a mod but couldn't quite pull it off.
Right.
I was a rude boy when I was a kid and sort of, that sort of thing. So you're
I definitely identified as a punk as a kid. And it's funny.
What did that come with, though, in fashion terms?
Fashion terms, a series of bad decisions as a kid. I'm quite tall. I'm 6'3.5" ish. I remember getting my first pair of brothel creepers, which was needless to putting another 2 inches on my height, and I hit my head on quite a lot of doors. I remember getting like my Fred Perry shirts and stuff like that. I did cut myself a mohawk with a pair of kitchen scissors when I was about 15, and my dad was furious, but also I think I looked like such a prat that he thought I'd sort of punished myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was wonky. Yeah. And the size, I didn't have clippers, so I did the size with scissors, and it looked awful.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I remember, I found this the other day going through an old box of stuff. I got a t-shirt, a plain grey t-shirt. I cut it in half, like down the sides, and then safety pinned it back together again. And I got a pen, and I wrote, and I don't know where I got this from. I wrote on the front of it in a marker pen, "If Elvis isn't dead, let's kill him."
Nice.
And I used to wear that to gigs and feel very punk.
Did it attract attention?
It did. I remember, in fact, I vividly remember Barney Greenway, the singer from Napalm Death, encountered me in the crowd at a gig. Just he was in the crowd and so was I, and he read my t-shirt and burst out laughing. So that was a small achievement.
Yeah, it's good. Well, I always think it's important when you're a kid to go through sort of fashion things and stuff, and you got to rebel against your our parents as well at times. When you talk about punk, it's interesting because punk obviously had a meaning and a purpose in life. It was sort of the punk I know was anarchy and rebellion and stuff like that. And Two Tone had a lot of sentiments. I find it really interesting that people often tell musicians they should stay away from politics, and yet it's so important. I mean, it's more important than a politician for people who are writing music and people in the arts to be talking to us.
I think, well, okay, there's a couple of interesting points in here. First of all, I'm bored of people telling any artist what they should or shouldn't do. What an artist should do is whatever the fuck they want to do.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If a band wants to make a political record, they should do that. And if they don't, they shouldn't. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of people trying to dictate what an artist says with the platform that they achieve in life through creating art is completely redundant. It's just like, if you don't think bands should make political records, form a band and don't make a political record and leave me out of your discussion. And indeed vice versa, like I say. The other thing is, I think that the older I get, the more I think it's important to be realistic about your ambitions for what music can achieve. Do you know what I mean? Bob Dylan didn't cause the civil rights movement. Music doesn't change the world on that level, but it changes individuals and their opinion and their consciousness, right? So when I was a kid, I heard that famous thing when they played Killing in the Name Of by Rage Against the Machine on Radio 1, uncensored. Who was that? Anyone remember who that was? It was someone got fired for it from Radio 1 for it. It was in 1993. And like we were all listening to the radio going, oh my God, they're swearing on Radio 1. This is the best band in the whole world.
Yeah. What, a DJ got fired?
Yeah, the
DJ. Can we look it up?
Yeah.
We'll get someone to look it up.
Yeah, it's... well, anyway, it's fine. Yeah. But, so I think that my opinion of the world was radically changed by first Rage Against the Machine, and then in particular a Canadian... Huh? Bruno Brooks.
Bruno Brooks!
Yes!
Rock and roll, Bruno Brooks. Yeah. That's really cool.
Punk as anything. But my view of the world and consciousness was expanded a lot by particularly a Canadian punk band called Propagandy, who remain one of my favourite bands, who are an extremely erudite, anarcho-political band from Winnipeg, of all places.
Right.
And it was just like they used to list books you should read in the liner notes. And I remember even reading The Clash and listening to Sandinista and stuff like that. That gave you things to check out and names to investigate and that kind of thing. So it definitely expanded my consciousness. But it's just there are bands who kind of announce, our new record's going to smash the system. And I'm like, it probably isn't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there are things that you can achieve with politics and art, and it's just occasionally you get people who get a little bit sort of overambitious. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
My brother had the Clash on loop in his bedroom non-stop, and my parents they couldn't stand it. They used to keep turning it up all the time, shouting out the lyrics and stuff. Yeah. It's very funny. Also with artists, I think, when they get to a certain level, they get to tour the world as well.
Yes.
And when you get to tour the world, you get to see So I've got my opinion of what's going on in America. Yeah. Actually, interestingly, when I go to America, I usually go to places which I've done recently quite a lot. I go to diners and stuff and start talking to them about Trump to find out what they think. Because if you just go to the cool places, you're only going to get one type of opinion. And I think if you're an artist and you're traveling around, you must get to have a lot of influences. See a lot of influences and understand lots of different opinions.
Yes, you do. I think at the same time, because I'm not only am I a huge America-phile, if that's a word, it is now.
Right.
But I also I'm proud of the fact there's a lot of British bands who can sell out a show in LA, Chicago, and New York, and that's it. And we play Kalamazoo, and we play Houston, and we play Idaho. Do you know what I mean? And have done for a decade now, and we have, I have a following in those places, and it's kind of cool.
You are like the Donald Trump of music.
No. Wow.
You've moved away from the cities,
Good
and
Lord,
you're going
don't pull quote that. But yeah, I mean, it's nice because I think that America is a huge and varied country. But I think one thing I try quite hard to do is to be self-aware about the implicit filters on the people I meet. So because mostly I'll meet people who come to my shows because I hang out after shows and say hi to people, and I meet people in the crew, meet people in bands. That's not necessarily a cross-section of American society. Do you know what I mean? They're filtered by the fact they wanted to be at a punk show.
Yeah.
But then with that in mind, something I found very interesting, in the summer of 2016, I was touring in the States a lot, which was during the election campaign. And I was doing a little piece on stage just saying I think Donald Trump's a kind of not only a civilizational catastrophe, but also I think that he represents like America's worst instincts. Do you know what I mean? I feel that the America that I know and love is better than this orange con man. And what was interesting was that on the coasts, that was fine. Everybody cheered. And when we got to the middle of the country, like I remember at the Denver show, there was a big crowd of people shouting, fuck Hillary, when I was saying this. And I'm kind of like, I didn't say anything about Hillary Clinton. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it was interesting that even within the self-selected audience of a punk show, there were nevertheless people who, as far as I could tell, were planning on voting for Trump, which was the moment when, I'm not trying to claim any sort of like foresight, but I thought the election was going to be closer than a lot of people did.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people were like, it's in the bag, there's no way he's going to win. And I remember thinking, I don't know, actually. I've seen some people I wouldn't have expected to.
I read an article from a journalist who had done a walk or something from Liverpool down to London. Right. He said it was just before Brexit, and he said the only time he found people who wanted to vote Remain was when he got to London. Throughout all the walk he did, he said everyone hated it. And I think both Brexit, this is nothing new, but I think both Trump and Brexit are votes of people who go, I can't stand the establishment. I don't like Barack Obama, and I don't like Clinton.
Yeah, I think
I want something new.
Votes of people who don't generally get a voice in the media, usually, for better or worse, and that's a separate discussion. I have a friend who's a stand-up comedian, and actually he like a jobbing, gigging stand-up comedian. He said to me, like after the Brexit thing, he was like, there's no surprise at all. If you've been out doing gigs in like Manchester and Aberdeen and wherever else, there's no surprise about this vote at all, and you have to be really quite insular to find it surprising. I did find it quite surprising, so more for me.
So did I. Which way did you vote? Can you say?
I essentially abstained, actually, and the reason for that is that I like to maintain friendship with smart people, smart politically aware people. I'm something of a politics nerd, and I had incredibly sharp and intelligent friends on both sides of the debate, and that really stumped me.
Did either of them know? Do you think? Were they speaking with conviction, or were they like the rest of us going, I don't really know?
No, I think they were arguing their case with conviction, right. But I think that everybody thought Remain was going to win. Yeah,
I certainly did. Yeah, it's interesting. But going back to where I come from, out in Hertfordshire, near the Watford way, there's a little group of them there who just think it's the best thing that's ever happened to us, but they want a really hard Brexit.
Which, I mean, I think the great tragedy for me currently is how it's been handled since the vote. I think that the fact that, to get politically specific for a minute, I think the fact that David Cameron banned the civil service from making any contingency plans for Brexit, given that the civil service tends to make contingency plans for everything, and they were apparently banned from doing this, I think that's catastrophic. You know, if you're going to offer a referendum which specifically said we will implement what you decide, you have to have a plan for what that might involve. And there was no plan, and there still doesn't seem to be a plan, and the whole thing's a fucking disaster now.
It is looking a little bit messy. Kind of it's interesting. I was in a pub not so long ago, and it's I try and keep my mouth shut, and I try and stay apolitical. I try and like you do. I think it's quite interesting to sit and watch it all play out. I don't want to take the extreme sides. And this girl was sitting there, and it was late at night, got to about 11 o'clock. So a few drinks happened, and then she went, there was another girl there from Holland or somewhere. She said, what do you all think of Brexit? And I thought, oh no. And then this girl went, everyone who voted Brexit is thick and racist. And I'm sitting there thinking, don't join in. I can't help it. No, they're not. You can't call everybody who voted Brexit thick and racist. They've got their own reasons for it. So it ended up, and then it was that point I realised there's absolutely no empathy for either side in this.
Right.
And this is
and I think this is a thing this is my sort of big bugbear in life. I think we briefly discussed this last time I saw you. Like, here's my grand theory. If you want my grand theory,
go on.
Is you know, we've experienced in the last 10 years a communications revolution in social media and the way we discuss our politics and talk to each other generally through social media. So talking about Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and whatever else it might be. And the problem, particularly with Twitter, is it's a sort of accidental machine for dehumanizing our opponents. Because when you argue with someone on Twitter, you're not arguing with a person sat in front of you. You're arguing with a Twitter handle, and there's this premium on outrage and on hot takes and on knocking people down and ad hominem attacks and all this kind of thing. And I think it's a disaster for arguments. And indeed, to back up my theory on this is the fact that Instagram tends to be nicer. The tone of discussion on Instagram is nicer, and the reason for that is because when you're on Instagram, you actually see a person. That's my theory.
Yeah, it's a good theory. Though isn't a lot of the stuff that people are doing, it's... I'm going to be careful here because virtue signaling is the word I'm going to use, but that's now used as a way of insulting someone.
Sure.
But it's signaling. So if I go on Trump Twitter and go, hey, fuck Trump, it basically says, hey, I'm in your camp over here, I'm in this. And if I go, yeah, come on England in the World Cup, hey, I love the RAF on 100 years, oh, isn't the Queen great? I'm just telling everybody who I am and what I am.
Yes, you're putting down identity markers.
Yeah, now I reckon most of the people who go, fuck Trump, won't have actually thought through the consequences which got Trump into power. He's a reality TV star.
Absolutely.
In power, in the most powerful man in the free world.
Selling his country down the river to the Russians.
Doing, well, whatever he's doing, he basically can say what he likes because he's a better option for many Americans than the other options. So he can do and say, he can lie, he can do. In fact, the more he lies, the more they like him.
Yeah, but then, then this is the important thing of how do we react to something like Donald Trump or Brexit or whatever it is you might disagree with. The worst thing that you can do is decide that everybody who you disagree with is thick and racist. Yeah. Because if you call a large group of people thick and racist, they're not going to engage with you and your ideas. It's become a slanging match straight away. I think it's absolutely vital that we find ways of discussing on a serious, calm, on a level way with Trump voters. I think it's vital we do that, because if your only reaction, and I think the American Democrats are doing a terrible job right now, if your only reaction to people voting for Trump is to go, you'll be on the pale, then they're just going to vote for him again.
Didn't they stitch up Bernie Sanders anyway? I mean, he would have been a good option for them.
I would certainly have preferred him to Donald Trump. The interesting about Bernie Sanders for me, I have some friends who are like lifelong Democratic activists in the States, and they really don't like Bernie Sanders because he wasn't a Democrat until 6 months before he joined the primary. He sort of swanned into a party that has its structures, tried to sort of essentially hostile take it over, failed, and then stormed out in a huff, kind of going, well, the Democrat Party's a stitch-up. And my friend Steve, who's been a door-knocking Democrat activist for his entire life in Phoenix, Arizona, is kind of like, fuck that guy. Do you know what I mean? Where were you in the 96 election or whatever? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I suppose so. Yeah,
that's an angle.
Don't you think it's weird though that I feel this about I've got twin daughters who are 16 and very politically engaged, and they talk a lot about American politics. They talk more about American politics than they do British politics. I think, and I think the one thing Trump has actually done, which is interesting, maybe Obama started it. They've put American politics on the map, and they seem to be dictating to the rest of the world what we're talking about, which is also very surreal.
Yeah, I do. I mean, obviously America is the world's superpower, so I think occasionally I run into Americans who are kind of like, well, why the fuck has an English person got an interest about this anyway? And I'm like, because you're the world's superpower. Of course I've got an opinion about it. Of course everybody does. I mean, take it as a compliment. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but yeah, I do know what you mean. I think that the other thing is that right now, particularly, and I'm sort of guilty of this myself completely, American politics is easier to discuss because it's more cut and dried. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of Trump is just profoundly awful,
but interesting.
But fascinating.
I always think, and I like to have this conversation with people. What is the future with Trump there? Because I met some futurists years ago. I did some mini documentaries, and a couple of the futurists said, in the future we're not going to regard politicians. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. That highly, we'll have businessmen take over, and it was proven massively with Donald Trump. Yeah. Do you think this is a new? We're in a situation with Brexit now where we need a really strong leader.
Yes.
And we haven't got that really at the moment.
Or just a competent leader.
Maybe. Yeah.
That'd do. I'd start with that.
Exactly. And we're looking around at our British politics, and it doesn't matter what side you're on at the moment. You're looking at going, hold on a second. Corbyn can't lead his party very well. May can't lead hers. It's a disaster.
That's a whole separate issue, which I think is really, and I have no idea what the answer to this is, but I think if you look at the kind of people who are at the forefront in politics, both in Britain and the USA, there's clearly something not working in the system if these are the people who can rise to the top of our politics. Because I think that across the board, they're pretty shabby. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And whatever else you might think of, for example, I was thinking about this the other day, May versus Corbyn on the one hand, and then let's say Attlee versus Churchill in 45. I happen to be reading Attlee's biography right now, so I'm thinking about this. But there was an intellectual heft and a moral heft to those arguments, which is utterly lacking today. And I don't quite know why that is, but somewhere in the sort of conveyor belt that's supposed to somehow from our society draw out the leaders and the best among us to lead us isn't working right now. Because if the best the Conservatives have to offer the country is Theresa May, there's something, or indeed Boris fucking Johnson, there's something wrong with that.
Is it also the fault of the media? Because the way we're having a long form conversation here, you could quite easily have had this for 8 minutes on a TV show, Sunday Brunch or something. Not that we would talk politics particularly, but you do that and you start doing it, and we can just take a little snippet of it and then go, oh, he's left wing or he's right wing or he's anti-Brexit or whatever. You can take. And do you not think
the pull quote or the Trump of whatever it was?
Yeah,
I'm not going to say it because then you're going to pull quote.
Yeah, the Trump of rock and roll.
Yes.
But I interviewed Harriet Harman on this podcast, and what I found really bizarre is she just kept talking. She was waiting for me to interrupt her, and I wasn't going to. I've got as much time as she wants. And actually, she had to get to PMQs, otherwise I'd gone on for about 2.5, 3 hours. Similarly with Alistair Campbell. They're so used to someone interrupting them and going, but what about this? And I was like, actually, do you know what? I'm just going to listen to your ideas because I like listening to ideas. And she's really a very interesting woman who's done a lot.
One thing I do think that comes from media and indeed social media is just that, like, in my very limited experience of meeting politicians and talking to them, 99 times out of 100, they give you much more pause for thought and interest if you actually engage them in a conversation one-on-one and give them a bit of time to talk. Because obviously they've got ideas, otherwise they wouldn't be in politics, they wouldn't have got to where they are. And there is something about, like, it's really easy, people go, yeah, I saw 30 seconds of Harriet Harman on the news and she looked like an idiot. And then you actually talk to her and she's got, whether or not you agree with her, she's obviously got a lifetime of thinking about the opinions that she holds. And we're missing that.
And they've got to be, they can only talk in sound bites. And then they get put on a TV show to discuss the pensions, and then they go, what would you do in a nuclear war? And they're like, well, I don't know, I'm in charge of pensions or something, you know what I mean? It's like, but no, you've got to have an opinion. It's like, but I wish more of them would go, do you know what, ask the guys in charge of that.
I'm absolutely dying for more politicians to do that. Like, when people, every now and again, they'll sort of ask, I remember somebody asking Ed Miliband, like, who his favourite character on EastEnders was, and he rattled off an answer that he'd obviously been prepped for by his media team. I want somebody who's standing for Prime to go, I don't know and I don't care. I'm paying attention to the economy. Who gives a toss?
Well, I thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to be that guy, but he's slowly gone away from it. When he first did his first PMQs, I thought, this is good. He's not going to join in, and he's not going to just slag everyone. He's going to try and debate, and he didn't. He ended up just playing the game
I don't
like
think he does very well in the format of PMQs, personally, in challenging the Conservatives. I mean, one could take from that that's a bad format for a political discussion, and that was completely fair enough for you. But having watched it myself, he generally comes across to me as being a bit doddering. To PMQs?
Yeah.
No, I've watched it a fair bit. I've not actually been.
Yeah, I've been. You should try and get in if you can, because it is unbelievably pathetic. I mean, it is so ridiculous.
Right.
You go, wow. I mean, the when you start, because you've obviously got the cameras on the main players as they're discussing. When you watch the actions of these supposed intellectuals going, oh no,
it's a little bit. It's
you're like, this
playground.
This is mental, but. Harriet Harman did say to me that she would rather that than a very accepting parliament where they accept things. But,
I do think.
But I think
there's a British tradition of having quite robust, cantankerous political discussion.
But it's quite pathetic. I mean, you go.
But then this goes back to what I was saying earlier: is that, like, somewhere along the line, the conveyor belt, like I say, or the system that's supposed to gather up and the best of us, is not really doing that currently. The other thing, though, and as a corollary to that, one of my pet hates is people looking to politicians as their saviors. And I think a lot of my American friends did this around the time of Obama. Now, I'm a big fan of Obama, generally speaking, but it was just a bit kind of like, I want politicians to, like, not start wars with people and sort out the bin collection. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure that I want my national leader to be a rock star. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, on some levels, I think the world would be a better place if the people who ran our countries were a bit more just sort of slightly administrators than supposed kind of, like, glorified press shot signing autograph leaders.
It's a power battle, though, isn't it, in politics? And it has to be that way, but it's quite sad because you can't have a politician... you can't even have a politician discuss the NHS because it's just a suicide. But you can't discuss the future of anything. So you can't go, actually, maybe we should think about this for the future. But you've got to stick with the basics.
But it's funny, to my mind, I can get technical for a minute, the sort of the Jeffersonian angle on the American Constitution was decentralizing, and I think that's excellent because I think that, and in my lifetime, certainly the American presidency has become much more kind of like a monarchy almost, you know what I mean? They show up with a motorcade of 1 million cars, and the only thing that matters is who wins as president and this kind of thing. And I think that this still does survive on some levels in the States. I think that it shouldn't be that important who the president is, or at least it should be equally important who's running the local state legislature.
Yeah.
And that would be better. And in Switzerland, they have this amazing thing, they call it the pub test, which is essentially the person who passes a law review should be the kind of person that you might run into in the pub.
Yeah.
Because if you run into the pub, you can go, oi, dickhead.
Well, I had this conversation with Alistair Campbell about depowering politicians and how important it was, where you reward people for the less power and they actually have them. I then came up with my solution, which he laughed at. But
What was your, come on, what's your solution?
No, I just talk about everyone, all the producers go, not again, please. I always talk about the back of the queue. You always reward someone for being in the back of the queue. You only serve someone at the back of the queue. It's that sort of principle. Then the queue doesn't build. So the sort of principle of it is that the more they distribute their power out, there's more people making their decisions. The better we feel they are. So it's not one man going for all the power.
But I agree. The person who should have the most autonomy over an individual life is that individual. Do you know what I mean? I think that as much as possible, people should decide what happens in their own life.
Which was my problem with Europe, even though I voted Remain. That was my one concern, is that the further away I am from that power, the more I worry. And I don't know who my local MP is, and I vote. I didn't know who my MEP was. Had no idea, actually. So, and I don't know how that works or runs. So that worries me, that when it's away from me. So that was the only reason I was thinking about it. So the sort of...
Well, I heard there were a lot of arguments on that side of the debate talking about things like sovereignty, which I thought made a lot of valid and interesting points.
And the point I always make about Prime Minister is they always go, I will do this. I will do that. So does Donald Trump. I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to do that, Theresa May. I'm going to sort Brexit out. And I want them to say, we will do it. I've got a great crack team here. I've employed the best. And we're going to sort it out. I don't want to hear any more eyes. But we are... I mean, Will Storr's book there, Selfie, I just talk about it a lot. It's a great book. If you get a chance to read that, it's about the self-esteem movement, how you're told to be brilliant and who you are. America suffering for it more than anything.
I do know what you mean. And like, I kind of... this is a topic that I'm unsettled about secretly, quietly, which is the whole sort of like, you know, everyone's a champion and everyone's the star of their own Hollywood story and all that kind of thing. And that kind of self-actualization thing, and you've got to love yourself first and all this kind of thing. And actually, to be honest with you, it's something that I've definitely sort of, some of these are sentiments that I have sort of promoted in my own songs at times. Do you know what I mean? And I do think that self-respect is an important thing, but it can be taken too far. And like, you know, occasionally I look out from the stage and I see an audience full of people taking selfies of themselves in front of me, and it's a bit kind of like, really? Is that? Or like, you know, when a kid crowd surfs onto the stage and then pulls out a phone, starts trying to take a selfie in front of the audience, it's a bit like, what the fuck is that?
What happened?
You know.
Well, it was invented, the self-esteem movement became really big in Thatcher and Reagan's era. I mean, that book's not about people taking selfies. It's about... It's about our self-esteem movement, which became huge, and that whole thing. Read that book; it's really interesting. It's not working that you go, I'm really important, and it's the rise of the narcissist, and also the rise of depression, because you aren't that special. You're the same as everybody else.
There's that speech in Fight Club where he says we're all raised to believe we're going to be movie stars and rock gods and all the rest of it, and we won't.
No.
And I always thought that was the most cutting part of that film. And it's funny. I mean, there's a danger in sort of arguing against that, where you get into a little bit of kind of stiff upper lipism, which I'm not sure. Because I do a lot of talking about mental health and that kind of thing, and I do think that self-respect that stays on the right side of narcissism is no bad thing. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? But I do think that there are excesses to that.
Let's talk about your album, because it was called it was called Be More Kind.
Yes.
And kind of I'm alluding to it all, you're discussing it here.
Yeah.
These are what your songs are about. A poem from Clive James inspired you.
Yes.
Is that Clive James, the Clive James I know from telly?
Yes, it is, yeah. Who is, so my story with Clive James is until about 10 years ago or so, he was the guy on the telly who was quite funny about movies, and then I found out that he's one of the best respected cultural critics of his generation, and he's an incredible poet, and almost his TV criticism was kind of like a sideline thing that he did. He wrote a book called Cultural Amnesia, which I read. I've read twice now, and the first time I read it, it just upended my thinking about almost everything. It's kind of a précis of the 20th century from a cultural point of view.
What's it called again?
Cultural Amnesia. And it absolutely just rearranged my thinking about everything, really. And because he's very funny, but he's incredibly learned. One of the things I love about him is his intellectual humility is actually kind of ridiculous. This is a man who taught himself to read French by buying a copy of À la recherche de temps perdu by Proust and a French dictionary.
Oh, wow.
And then just sat there until he could speak French. And he speaks like 8 European languages, and is an absolute intellectual titan. And in his autobiography, which is amazing and worth reading, he refers to himself as being like a bit of a dolt and intellectually substandard all the time. And he was just thinking, what are you talking about? You're obviously a genius. Right. Anyway, he is terminally ill. I think, touch wood, he is still with us, but he got given 6 months to live about 3 years ago. And he started writing a series of poems about facing the end of his life. And one of them is called Les Ondes Ténèbres. And in it, there's the line in the first stanza where he says, "I should have been more kind. It is my fate to find that out, but find it out too late." And that just devastated me when I read it. I mean, in and of itself, but also for somebody of that kind of intellectual stature, in my opinion, to say that as his sort of conclusion on life, if you see what I mean, just absolutely floored me. And it's not an original statement in this way. I mean, Aldous Huxley, at the end of his life, said, "I'm slightly embarrassed to say that after 40 years working as a social scientist, the only advice I could give is that we should be a little kinder to each other." And the last line of Kurt Vonnegut's last book is, "God damn it, babies, we've got to be kind." So it's a thing that people have said in places before, but it just, going back to what I was saying earlier, two things. First of all, the whole thing about us dehumanizing our opponents on a regular basis through social media, but also what we're saying about appropriate ambitions for political statement within music. It seemed to me the statement "be more kind" isn't going to save the world, and it's not the answer to all of our arguments. It's not a solution to anything, but it's not a terrible place to start. Do you know what I mean? I try and do this. I fail at it regularly, but if I'm having a political argument, I try and consider that I'm the arsehole. Do you know what I mean? At the beginning, just consider maybe you're the idiot. Just for 5 seconds. Yeah. And if you go, "No, absolutely not," then great, you're more convinced of what you think and who you are. But to consider that the person you're arguing against might have had a bad day, you know, or
they've got different influences.
So a good example of this, Arlene Foster from the DUP, who's somebody's politics I really profoundly disagree with. But I did a bit of reading about her because she's very worked up about her politics. And it turns out that her dad was shot in the head in front of her by the IRA when she was about 8. And then about a year later, she was on a school bus that got blown up by the IRA who were trying to kill school children. Now, those two events in a young life are going to push you in a certain way. That doesn't justify, that doesn't excuse some of the more kind of bigoted stuff that she says. But if you don't know that about her, I don't think you can evaluate her properly.
Oh, yeah, I was watching a documentary on this guy, and he ended up shooting a policeman, but he over here. But he, at 6 years old, they had family footage of him. He looked really happy kid, brother and sister. Mum died. 6 months later, dad died. Brother, sister, and everyone got split up, put into homes and stuff. And later, and it's just this amazing watching the life evolve from there. It's a different set of values.
And these don't excuse it. Everybody is ultimately responsible for their own actions, but nevertheless, a bit of understanding about where somebody's coming from is not a bad thing.
Do you believe in free will?
I do.
Do you? I'm not sure I do. I think we might be machines.
Well, okay. The whole thing, I'm aware that there's that whole sort of philosophical thing where they've done tests about reaction times and all the rest of it. And I just think that it's slightly a word game to my mind, because at the end of the day, the individual is still the person doing the thing. Whether or not your conscious synapses fired a millisecond before or after your unconscious ones did, doesn't change the fact that when I lift up this phone, I lifted it up.
But can we show empathy for racism, homophobia, sexism?
I don't think we should excuse those views and the impact they have because they negatively impact on other people, but I think that if we wish to change those things, which I do emphatically, you have to ask how they come about.
Yes. Which is your point, empathy.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And understand it. So someone's racist or homophobic and sexist, I feel, often because of fear. Not hatred. It's because they don't understand what's going on, and it's that they're, especially change. I mean, immigration's a big one for that. I talked about it with Patterson Joseph on here. Immigration's a big one where suddenly your environment changes, and you go, "I'm scared and I don't like it."
Yes.
And then 20 years later, you're used to it, and it's fine.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the immigration thing's an interesting one because I'm instinctively very, very pro open borders, immigration, and all the rest of it. But I think there is an argument to be made that the life that I live, living in a nice bit of North London, isn't hugely affected by immigration. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? The other thing, this is a slightly left field comment, but I'm a diehard fan of London till the day I die. I'm a Londoner to my very core. And one of the things I love about London is I think London teaches you that change is okay. Because the whole city's changed radically since I came to London when I was 18, or 16 when I first started coming here. And in a way that you don't get perhaps in slower moving communities, it teaches you that change is exciting and it's kind of cool. Do you know what I mean? And people kind of go, "Oh, Soho's not what it used to be." Yeah, of course it's not, and it won't be in 20 years either. And it makes change exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so the other thing I think is important to throw into this is that there are people who are just shitty, who are just evil. Actually, they do exist. And I think Steve Bannon's quite a good example of that, for example, or indeed Nigel Farage, who I don't really have any time for. I think that he's a deeply unpleasant human being. And there is a limit at some level on to this idea of empathizing and trying to understand. But it's still, nevertheless, it's the thing that I always have with this is like, what's your alternative strategy other than trying to understand and then change it? Because on some level, sooner or later, the alternative strategy is punching someone in the face, which is not a good idea. When that whole punch Nazis debate was going on, all my friends who were in favour of it looked to me like people who would lose a fight. Do you know what I mean?
What was the punch Nazis?
There was a whole debate, is it okay to punch Nazis? That Richard, the American Nazi guy, Richard... Can't remember his name. He got punched in the face during a TV broadcast, and loads of people went, this is great, Nazis getting punched in the face.
That's a bizarre thing, isn't it?
And I just thought to myself, if you normalise that, you're going to get punched in the face sooner or later, and you're not going to like it, and you're not going to have a leg to stand on.
Yeah. I get back to the thing I keep quoting my old podcast here, but we had Reverend Richard Coles on this, and this really sticks in my mind because I'd never thought about this until he came on the podcast, that I don't like religion. And one of the reasons why I didn't like religion, I do now, I don't mind it, but one of the reasons I didn't like the Church of England sort of religion stuff was because I was growing up when the gay movement became very big, and especially in music. We had sort of Boy George, and we had a lot of pop stars, and I liked them. Yeah. And I thought it was great, and they hated them, and you can't help it. You end up taking sides.
Yeah, of course.
So I ended up taking sides with people who I thought were great against the church, who I thought were being ridiculous. Yes. And that stuck with me for years. And then Richard was it, because obviously Richard is gay, and so I was going, how does it work with you being in the church? He goes, well, we're all right now, and I'm like, well, we weren't back then, so I'd never revisited it really.
Sure.
And I think that again, it's like that's why it's so important for artists to speak about this stuff, because it's so influential.
I'm going to do a little bit of a plug here, if you don't mind. My partner Jess is an actress, and she produced and starred in a play last year called Gym for Breakfast that was a play about mental health, and Stephen Fry came down and saw the play and did an after show talk and endorsed it, and it was great. And Stephen Fry said a wonderful thing that night which really sort of helped me and changed my opinion about stuff. I'm going to get to a point eventually, I promise.
You've got all day, it's fine.
I always try and be have humility about what I do for a living. I'm not a nurse, I'm not a teacher, do you know what I mean? And if I stop making records tomorrow, no one would suffer. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I think that in the grand scheme of society, there are many more important jobs than being a guy who sings his own songs on stage. And so I always try and keep that in mind, that what I do, it's fun, it's great, it causes people to enjoy themselves on my shows, and that's great, but it's not as vital as many other things that people do and get paid less for, and blah 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 and all that kind of crap. But but in following that line of thought, I did have at times got into a point of kind of thinking that just art doesn't matter, which is an odd thing for an artist to say, but I found myself almost reaching that statement. And then Stephen Fry said a wonderful thing that night, and he talked about the change in gay rights in his lifetime, and he said that's the role that artists play, is a spearhead for a change of opinion. And it made me feel quite a lot better about what I do for a living. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, that is what we do.
Yeah.
And that is valid, and that is important.
Yeah, Boy George and all that lot made it all right for
and Elton John and
whoever. You're sitting around going, yeah, well, that's fine.
Yeah,
because
completely.
you know.
I remember when Rob Halford from Judas Priest came out as gay, and anyone who wasn't a metal fan just went, yes, obviously. I mean, he spent the last 30 years running around in like studded leather. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, Judas Priest literally have a song called "Hell Bent for Leather." I mean, hiding in plain sight. Yeah. But it was an interesting moment. That was in the late 90s, and quite a lot of metal fans who have, at times, and I say this as a metal fan, I'm not doing anyone down, but there have been moments when the metal community's been a little bit slow to catch up with various things. But that was a wonderful kind of watershed moment, because I think that was a moment when a lot of kind of older metal fans went, "Oh my God, Rob Halford's gay," and then they went, "Oh, I guess that's fine."
Yeah.
You know, I've been going to his gigs and listening to his records for 30 years, and it has been fine. So it is fine.
Everything's fine. It's just people are scared of it, and once they get over or they're being told by their society that it's not acceptable. That's another problem. But you know, just what you've talked a bit about mental health, and you say you speak on it. What do you speak about on it?
Well, so I have had my ups and downs, and with the new record that I just put out, in the build-up to it, I went through quite a rough patch of my personal life, which has a happy ending, and it had a lot to do with my partner and indeed to do with drugs, which I had a big problem with. And she essentially sort of did the it's me or them kind of business, if you know what I mean. And in part of trying to make the right choice about that, I went through CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it was sort of life-changing for me, actually, like really profoundly life-changing. And I went from being a very unbalanced, unhappy person to being better.
Yeah. Well, no, I for regular podcast listeners all know that I've suffered from mental health issues, which is why I started this podcast, because I started reading self-help books constantly, non-stop. And then I thought, well, I'm going to give my advice, their advice, which I sucked it all in and then gave out. So we basically started this podcast, but it's interesting because I've never gone into the medication. I tried it once. I hated every minute of it. Yeah. And so I've always done the therapy route and reading. I do a lot of reading and I do therapy, and I've done therapy. And I think that's good. What is your advice for people if they are suffering from mental health?
I think, well, the thing about it for me, the first thing is that in my experience, the worst part of mental health is isolation and not communicating about it, which is in large part to do with social stigma attached to mental health issues. You kind of go, I'm embarrassed to talk about this, or no one's going to care if I talk about this, or my friends are going to laugh at me if I tell them about this, or it's an admission of weakness and this kind of thing. But the problem with that is that isolation is like a pressure cooker, because you then get worse and you get worse and worse and worse and worse. And the very first moment when I really started talking to a friend of mine about it felt like the biggest thing in the world for me. And he was just like, oh, fuck, I'm sorry to hear that, man. Well, let's talk about it. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like it wasn't a big deal to him, but it wasn't this like kind of apocalypse in our friendship. He just went, oh shit, okay, well, let's do something about that then. And it was like, oh my God, I should have done this years ago.
It's tough doing your job and having mental health issues, though, isn't it? Because you are away from home a lot.
Yes.
And there is isolation there.
There is.
Hotel rooms are hard.
Yeah, they are. And there is a lot of the life that you lead as a touring musician is really odd. It's really odd,
yeah.
And it's hard.
Everyone thinks it's so glamorous, but it's hard work and it's exhausting.
And also, I mean, one of the things that's been an issue for me, I've spent my entire professional life in situations where alcohol is more readily available than food.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, and if I drink everything in the fridge, someone will put more in there.
Yeah.
And if I want to find something else to get stuck into, I can do it. It'll take me about 5 minutes.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you do. And then you're not eating properly, and you're not sleeping properly, and you're just complete fucking mess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and there's a tune on the new record called Little Changes, which is sort of like trying to talk about that, what CBT did for me, because again, talking about this sort of how it can feel like an insurmountable, enormous thing to actually make the first step of talking to somebody about what you're going through. Similarly, one of the problems I had was it was like so much needs changing that I don't know where to start, and I just have to become a different person if I'm ever going to get better. So fuck it, I'm just going to be me, and this is who I am, and I'm stuck in this. And CBT was great because CBT just breaks it down into bite-sized chunks. And one of the things that they did was really talk me through my decision-making process. So it's like, you're at a bar, the suggestion comes up of picking up some stuff. How do you feel? What's your thought process? Why do you do this? Why don't you not do it? Do you know what I mean? And it really sort of like it broke the boulder down into rocks. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so that's the idea, and the song talks about it, little changes. It's like, if all you do is try and aim to change everything all in one go, then you're probably going to fail.
How does it work putting it down in a song? These sort of personal things. Is it therapeutic to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's a large extent to which my writing has been a form of public therapy for me for a long time. I put out a record in 2013 called Tape Deck Heart that was a whole record about me screwing up an important relationship in my life, and I dealt with it in a public way, in a way that, for the most part, I'm happy with it. The person who was on the receiving end of that didn't enjoy it very much, and I do feel bad about that on some levels. But generally speaking, a lot of people have come to me over the years and said that they've taken solace from that record, or it's helped them through a situation or whatever. I guess the point, the knack of poetry or songwriting or whatever you want to call it is just finding that neat and relatable way of saying a thing that everyone's thinking.
You've got a lot of really, you've got a lot of fans who really like you, haven't you? But
I hope so.
No, you do. Yeah, it's like every time I've had you on a show, so you get a lot of your fans come on and discuss it. Do you get criticism as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, although there's an interesting point in this. I mean, obviously, social media. There's a gang of people on Twitter who hate my guts. I've muted them all now, so whatever. And they're entitled to their opinion, whatever. They don't know me, but life goes on. But a thing I've had since the early days of my career, and this goes back to what I was saying about selling my own merch. My email address is on my website, always has been, always will be, and anyone can email me at any point, and they do. And of my mailbox, 90% of it is people who like me, or either just saying that, or saying I really like you. When are you next playing here? Or I really like you, my brother's getting married, can you say hi? Or whatever. And I do all that stuff and it's great. But of course there's the 10% of people who find my email address and go, aha, an opportunity to call Frank Turner names. Yeah. And they do. And the thing that I've learned over the years, and I actually think this fed quite a lot into the way that I came about phrasing everything on Be More Kind, was that if you get an email from somebody going, you're a fucking prick, I hate you for the following 900 reasons, the instinctive reaction on my part, other than just deleting it, is to reply in kind and go, well, you're a fucking prick as well. And I've learned that if you don't do that, if you keep your cool, keep your manners, then you can achieve something. You're not going to save the world doing it. But so for example, a couple of years ago, there was a guy who was from Minneapolis who had read something I said in an interview, decided I was therefore the devil, and sent me a very long, angry email telling me that I was the devil and that I'd sold punk rock out and blah, 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 and all this kind of thing. And I wrote back and I said, well, I'm sorry you feel like that. A couple of things I think you've got the wrong end to stick on, and a couple of things we just flat out disagree on. But anyway, go in peace, all the best kind of thing. Yeah. And it turned into a conversation, and I ended up putting him on the guest list for our next Minneapolis show. And he came down and we had a beer. And we didn't get on super well, I'll be honest with you. But it was a much better end point to that.
I just love the idea of you selling out. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Where's the line between selling out?
The first time I ever got called to sell out, right? This is a true story. It was about the third tour I ever did. We had a van that had seats in it.
Oh,
and the
sell
guys
out.
No, this is true. The guys at the squat where we used to rehearse saw the van pick us up and we were loading the gear in. And the guy came over and said, who you think you are? Fucking Motley Crue. And because we had seats in a transit van. But I remember at the time thinking, well, that's done. If I'm a sellout now, then that, it's almost like getting your BCG or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's done that. Carry on.
Yeah, it's amazing the whole principle of selling out. When that's what you're supposed to do. And surely the more people who listen to you, the better it is.
Art's a form of communication. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And therefore, you should want to communicate with people.
Yeah.
There are occasions when people do things that I personally would find unethical, should we say?
Yeah.
But the first thing is you've got to put yourself in that person's shoes before you judge their decisions. And secondly, so what? I mean, just listen to something else.
I went to a talk with Anthony Gormley, and he said he was sitting in a art exhibition gallery talking about his work, and he realised there's sort of 20 people coming in there. And there was hundreds walking past the window, and he thought, why am I putting my work in here and not out there? And he said his art should be, whether you like it or not, you should have to see it. Yeah. And I love that. And I think that's what selling out is like, here's my art. You can hate me or love me, but here's my bloody work, and this is it. The
word selling out, all that really means to me is making art for dishonest reasons. Do you know what I mean? If it's not a pure expression of your creative vision or whatever. That's what selling out is, and I think the number of people who do that is vanishingly small.
But then on there, I remember interviewing Lemmy once and saying to him, "What do you think about Kylie Minogue or something like that?" Being a cocky idiot DJ, and he went, "How many records you made?" I felt I was so embarrassed. And I went. No, and he goes, well, she seems to be doing better than you have, so why are you? And I was like, I'm so embarrassed.
Right.
And he was like, I'm going to stick up for her because she's doing it. At least she's doing it.
Absolutely.
And I thought,
and plus being like the people at the top of the pop world are incredible. I watched the Lady Gaga documentary on Netflix long ago. I'm not particularly taken with the music, but the thing I came away from that documentary thinking is there is no one else in the world who could do what she does.
Yeah.
She is an absolute one of a kind. And kudos to her. But here's another bugbear of mine in recent years, and I think that we should all get behind this because I think it.
Self-esteem movement, right there.
There we go. The older I get, I'm really bored of people who think that music is a zero-sum game. And what I mean by that is people who think if one band does well, then automatically some other band isn't doing well, or that they're taking away from other people. Because it's not fucking true.
Yeah.
It isn't true. And so to pick an example, I am not particularly a fan of the work of Kasabian, right? Mm-hmm. I have friends who get out of bed early to hate Kasabian all day, and I think it's a waste of their time. Because you know what Kasabian do? Every time Kasabian play a gig, they make 10,000 Kasabian fans happy, and that's admirable, and I'll take my hat off to them. Plus, also, getting 10,000 people together in a room is fucking hard to do, and a lot of people are trying to do it, and not many of them succeed.
Their gigs bounce.
Yeah, exactly. So my take on Kasabian is good for them, well done, long may they reign, all power to Kasabian.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to their records, so I don't.
Yeah.
And that's literally it.
Yeah.
And it's just, and even like, you know, I've got friends who get angry about Simon Cowell and X Factor and that kind of thing, and it's just like, just ignore it.
Yeah.
Just ignore it. It's not impacting your life in any way. You aren't selling less records because X Factor exists. That's bollocks.
Yeah, again, it's the media we work in. I know, I suppose people have hated stuff forever, haven't they?
Yeah, it's a very human instinct, but I'm trying to purge that from my own life. Do you know what I mean? If there's a band that I don't like, then I just move on.
Yeah.
You know, and like I say, knowing firsthand the amount of time and effort and life that goes into creating just one record, let alone a career.
There's also the rise of the superstar, what do you call them, the superstar journo, the journalist who wants to be famous. You've got millions of them on TV now who, you know, the journalist's job was to report. Maybe so you're the guy behind the camera, behind the pencil, behind the keyboard. Yeah. Now they want to be in front. So you know, you got a plethora of them over here, loads in America. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got the superstar journalists who are trying to make a name out of comment.
Yeah.
Because news is dead. Yeah, news is dead. Yeah. So you got to make a comment. Well, it is because we can get it so quickly, and it's so there's no point in reporting on news really. So you've got to be comment, and so you just have to hammer someone. It's the hardest thing to do is go, hey, I listened to Frank Turner's album, it's amazing, and you know you all really love it. Lyrically, it's fantastic. It really sets the point. It's a lot easier to go, who does he think he is? What school did he go to? And it's like, let's just hammer him for whatever I can find, and then do. It's a lot easier format.
Yeah, and that plays to our basic human instincts. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we all have them. And you know, there have been days when I've gleefully spent half an hour ripping on a band that I don't like to my friends. I can't stand the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But this is what I'm saying at the moment, is that what I'm trying to do is to stop doing that and actually to go, you know what, good for the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's certain bands that I don't like listening to, but everyone else loves them, and I go, I don't get it, but
you can just listen to something else.
Exactly.
It's no one, literally no one is holding you down and forcing you to listen to these bands.
Now, I can't get you on without talking about the Olympic ceremony.
Yep.
So let's quickly do that because it was amazing when I turned on the telly, and there you were.
Yeah, my phone blew up.
It was brilliant. It was amazing. You were like stood on a grassy knoll or something, a grassy hill somewhere, and it was
a fake hill.
Yeah. And then Gary Lineker introduced you, or was it, or Claire Balding?
The only time his and my paths will ever cross.
What an amazing gig! How did that happen?
It was so.
You were the first act, weren't you, of the opening ceremony?
Well, we were the last act of the sort of pre-opening ceremony. Right. So we were like the sort of end of part one, and just about got on the TV broadcast on that, and then we went off, and then they reset, and the big proper opening ceremony began. Nevertheless, just before we went on, a guy on a clipboard wandered past and said, "There's 27 million people watching on the telly," and I said, "Don't tell me that now.
It was
amazing.
Tell
me that afterwards." Do you know what I mean? Anyway, what happened was Charlie, my manager who's over here, and we got an email from Danny Boyle's people saying they wanted a meeting. And we knew that the Olympic thing was happening, and we both instantly went, well, it's not the Olympics, because that's ridiculous. So it's probably a film or something. But he didn't say in the email what the meeting was about. So we went, I remember I played Hay on Wye Festival, the book festival, and then I drove sort of overnight to get back to East London for the meeting at 10 a.m. The other thing that happened with that is I got there and I realized I didn't know what Danny Boyle looked like, right? So I went I was in the toilet, so I was at the urinal, and I was Google image searching Danny Boyle, and he came up, and it was the guy stood next to me who was looking at my phone. He was like, hello. But yeah, and then we went in, and he'd already at that point mocked up a sort of animated version of our bit of the open ceremony, which already had my songs on, and like a little stick figure with my face sort of computer glued onto it. And so we were kind of already in it, and he was like, what do you reckon? And I remember as well, he sort of talked through it, and like we played 3 songs, one of them was broadcast. His choice of songs, he was like, well, my suggestion would be these 3, and they were deep cuts. Like he wasn't going for just the singles. Do you know what I mean? One of them was a B-side.
Yeah.
And I sort of said, well, you've thought about this more than I'm going to, so yes, we'll play those 3. That's fine. But it was beautiful. Towards the end of the meeting, he said to me and Charlie, like, you don't have to decide now. You can go away and think about this. And we sort of looked at each other and went, no, that's fine. We'll decide now. This will do. And it, obviously, it was a fillip to my career, and that's good. But also, it's more just that in life, how many times are you going to get asked that question?
Yeah.
And like, do I really want to be the guy propping up the bar, telling the story about the time I said no to the Olympics?
I think you sold out. That's
well, so did various people on the punk scene.
Oh, they didn't.
They did.
Oh, they didn't.
One of them wrote me an open letter. Yeah, one of them wrote me an open letter, which was hilarious because I was like, first of all, my email address is on my website if you want to get in touch. I mean, I didn't pay attention. Whatever.
I thought it was amazing because I thought I was going to tune in and I was going to see, I don't know, Dinah Ross or something like that. And then suddenly you're stood there and I'm like, this is brilliant. It's so British that you're stood there playing a guitar and singing. You know, it's like...
One of the other things, we had to generally sign like legally binding non-disclosure agreements that we weren't going to tell anyone we were playing before the event. It had to be a big reveal. The only person I told was my mum. And she went and fucking told all her sisters. I told her. But anyway, and the other thing that happened with that, which was glorious, at the time I was living above a pub that's run by my best friend who's called Dave Danger, right? And in the week before the opening ceremony, or in the week run-up, it was on a Friday, he said to me, what are you doing on Friday night, mate? If you're around, we're going to get the big screens down in the pub and show the opening ceremony. Come down and have a beer. And I said, I will be there, in a manner of speaking. And he just looked at me like, okay,
loony,
whatever. And then what I did, there was a big sort of celeb after party after our bit of the open ceremony, and I didn't go because it's not really my comfort zone. I don't really want to hang out awkwardly in a room trying to shake hands with Dizzy Rascal, who I love, by the way, but nevertheless. So instead, I got in a cab and went back to the pub. And walked in and was like, all right, lads.
What was
Dave
the reaction?
was like, you were there, and now you're here, and what the fuck is going on? And it was kind of glorious.
That is very cool. What did you think of the ceremony? It was good, wasn't it?
It was great, absolutely. Though. And just wonderful. Again, this is why I did it. It's like, you know, you can take many things away from me, but like that's the thing that I did. I did that, and that was the moment my mum stopped asking me when I'm going to get a real job.
I always tell this story. I was on TV. I was literally on TV doing Soccer AM, producing, writing, presenting my own show, and my granddad said to me, Tim, it's not too late. I can get you a job at the post office. Nothing wrong with the job at the post office, but he just couldn't. He didn't think it was real. It's not a real job you're doing, and it isn't really.
My parents are sort of like small C conservative, if you know what I mean. And for a long time they had issues with what I do. And I'm old, and there was a source of conflict for a long time, but I'm old enough now to see that what it was, I was doing something that was just completely outside their frame of reference.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So they just didn't get it. And like I think my mum thought I was still like playing open mic covers nights in the back of bars when we were selling out Brixton Academy. Do you know what I mean? And she just didn't really get it.
Did they come and watch?
My mum now comes and signs autographs. She's bang into it.
It's my son.
Yeah, well,
is your dad not into it?
Me and my dad are estranged, so
right. I'm sorry about that.
These things happen. In fact, I'm working on that actually.
Okay.
I'm working on that too.
Oh, good. Okay, just before we get on to the questions, just one thing I've always intrigued to know: how did you get from punk to the style of music you do now?
Okay, well, the problem with my musical education was that I was an autodidact. I taught myself, and it meant that I didn't really know. This is sort of pre the internet. I was getting into punk by like writing off to distros and buying weird records, and I didn't really have any holistic understanding of the history of music. So there was a point when I was about 23 when I could have told you every single last thing about the Cro-Mags, who are a New York hardcore band from the 80s, and I'd never heard a Bob Dylan song because I just didn't know about it. And then there was a moment when my old hardcore band, we were touring, we were playing hardcore, we were touring with hardcore bands, I was listening to hardcore bands, and I just sort of went, ugh, I need to cleanse the palate. And actually, a friend of mine gave me a compilation record of alt country, record label called Loose Records. And I got that, and then I listened to some Ryan Adams, and then I started listening to Springsteen, and then I got into Johnny Cash, and I got into Dylan and Neil Young. And indeed the Beatles and the Stones, do you know what I mean? And all of this was revelatory to me. And which is a weird thing to say, I know, but that's just how it fell out for me.
No, I don't think it is. I was discussing on one of the podcasts how you years ago you had your set, so you'd listen to the sort of music you would want to listen to. And there's no way that the Smiths came anywhere close to what me and my friends were listening to. They were the weirdos.
Yeah.
Latterly, I now listen to the Smiths and think it's unbelievably good. Songs, but at the time I would refuse to listen to it because it's Morrissey. He looked weird on telly, and you know.
I resisted Springsteen for a long time because I thought he was that American twat in the blue jeans.
Yeah, I still don't get Springsteen. I'm not a massive fan of Springsteen.
Well, I could give you a playlist that might help.
But he did. I watched him at Glastonbury one year, and he just. not only did he go on forever, but he didn't play anything I knew or anyone knew for about an hour. And he just did this set, which was like, and people behind me going, play one we know. Yeah. And it was like that classic thing of, come on, give us it. We're all ready.
Throw us a bone.
Just give us something we know. And then at the end, he did it all. And it turned out to be all right. But it was like, we had to sit through a new album or something, or B-sides or something. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. So. Well, for me, like, I got the record Nebraska, which is his solo album he made in the mid-'80s. It's just vocals and guitar, and it's like really dark folk songs about murder. Okay. And it was so different from what I expected of Springsteen that it really, it made me kind of go, right, I need to reevaluate this.
Would I stitch you up if I say, give me 3 Springsteen songs I should listen to?
No, that's fine. We can do that. Okay, although any Springsteen fan listening to this is now sharpening a knife.
His email, by the way, is on the website. You can email him. Springsteen fans.
Reason to Believe.
Right, I'm going to give this a go.
Okay, Reason to Believe. Devils and Dust.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say, I'm trying to pick non-obvious ones. I would say Growing Up.
Growing Up. Okay, I'll give them a go. And is it musically or lyrically or both?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Springsteen's the great all-rounder.
I've learned a lot. War on Women.
War on Women.
Sorry. War on Women. And there was another thing, a book, wasn't there?
Cultural Amnesia.
You're giving it. This is.
I'll tell you what. You try out the Cro-Mags as well. CROMAGS. They released an album in '87, I think, called Age of Quarrel, which is regarded as a mid-period hardcore classic.
Quarrel. Okay. Anyone listening to this, right, podcast, I want you, anyone watching as well, I want you to go and do all this, listen to it, and then email me, and also you could email Frank, and you can tweet him as well.
Yes.
And tell him what you think of all these things. So, all right, let's get on to the questions. And thanks, by the way, for doing this interview. It's been really good. So what one piece of advice would you like to give our listeners that has been invaluable to your life?
Well, 2 spring to mind, one of which I've already kind of mentioned, which is to always try and consider that you might be wrong when you're having an argument. I think and again, like I say, I fail at that all the time.
Yeah,
but it's not a terrible approach. It certainly humanizes people you're arguing against. Just try and understand where they're coming from for 2 seconds, even if you think they're awful. And if you then continue to think they're awful, brilliant, you've done the requisite work.
Right.
The other one, my buddy Josh, who is a very good friend of mine, who unfortunately took his life 4 years ago, but he once said to me, the best piece of advice he'd ever been given was always try and keep your head above your ass.
What does that mean?
Well, it's just in life. If your head's above your ass, you're probably all right.
Okay, I like that. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made?
Biggest mistake I've ever made? That I can think of a few. If I'll give you a top 3, not in order.
Go on then.
One of which, the women in my life will have some opinions about this. Right. I ended a relationship in 2012 in an unkind way, and I still feel bad about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it was the relationship I was supposed to stay in for the rest of my life, but I could have handled it very differently, and I feel bad about that. There have been times when I have made public statements that were ill-phrased, should we say, that I've got in trouble with. And if I could go back in time, I would definitely take more care with my language and just trying to, again, empathise with the people I was disagreeing with.
Yeah, I don't think that's fair on anyone, though, because I this is a real problem I have. You can say one thing and get fired, or in your case, one thing and people will label you. And I think you've got to take an overall. If anyone listens to this podcast, they'll go, "Hey, Frank Turner's a nice guy. He knows his stuff, and he's and he seems to think things through. He's intellectual, and he loves his art. And everything. But if I can take one bit of it and put it out there,
of rock and roll,
you keep doing it. But
I'm giving you the soundbite now.
If you do that one bit, then everyone can go, "Wow, this is what he is. He's just this racist, homophobic, sexist guy, whatever you are." Do you know what I mean? It's like
which I'm not.
Which you're not. No, that whatever you can take it, and I always think that's unfair. And this is
absolutely.
This is the media we're creating at the moment.
I agree with that. Nevertheless, there are things I said in public which, in retrospect, I think were badly phrased to the point of being slightly embarrassing to me, and I would like to change what I said if I could, which I can't, so you just carry on with life. And then the third one is I once punched myself in the balls in front of 10,000 people by accident. I was trying to do the Roger Daltrey, swing the microphone around, and the problem with the Roger Daltrey microphone swing is getting it out there is easy, and once it's out there, it's in stasis, you're fine. The hard bit is getting it back from out there in the arc, back into the hand.
He loops it out front, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, and then you pull it back through the hand and you catch it. Yeah. I've screwed it up. I was on stage at Download. There were 10,000 people watching, and the mic hit me square in the nuts. 2 seconds before I had to sing the next line of the song, which it was supposed to be kind of like, and actually came out as like, oh no. So that was pretty bad.
Watching the Who's amazing, isn't it? Because you got Dolce doing that, and you got Townsend doing his old windmill thing where they're playing. They're great to watch, that band.
Great band.
I mean, their audience are phenomenal.
Yeah. I once spoke to Roger Daltrey on the phone, and he sounded so like Roger Daltrey, it was almost like someone doing an impression of Roger Daltrey. I know it's a weird thing to say. We played the Teenage Cancer Trust that he organises every year, and it's a wonderful thing. We played the Royal Albert Hall, and he always comes down, but he didn't make our show because I think one of his grandchildren was taken sick or something like this, which is completely legit. And in order to apologise, I sort of, this mobile phone, like on a velvet cushion, sort of got brought into the room. It was like, it's Roger. So I picked up the phone, and he said, hello, it's Roger Daltrey. And I was like, my God, it is. Yeah. And he just sounded a bit too like Roger Daltrey.
Those Teenage Cancer Trust gigs, I host them most years. And they're just amazing gigs because I tell you why it's amazing, because the artists genuinely do it because they like the charity and they like Roger, and it's a good venue to play, don't get me wrong, the Royal Albert Hall, but it all seems everyone does it for the right reasons.
Yeah. The other thing with Teenage Cancer Trust, I did some gigs going to some of their wards that they run, and it was a fantastic exercise in having my ego flattened, right? Because you're in a room, you got a bunch of teenage kids who are very ill, but they're okay, they're compass mentis and they're fine, and you're playing guitars, and they didn't have a fucking clue who I was, and they didn't care. And I was playing a song, and this girl come up to me and said, who's the most famous person you've got on your phone? And I was like, she was like 14 or something, and I racked my brains. I was like, Danny Boyle? No. Billy Bragg, no. And I was sort of racking my brains for anyone. Dan from Bastille, no. And she'd never heard of anyone I had on my phone, and she was like, tch, and sort of walked off. And I was just, it really, really brought me down a peg or two. It was great.
Yeah, they good. What they do though, I've been to see their awards. They're fantastic, aren't they?
It's amazing.
All right, any life hacks?
Life hacks, yeah. Actually, I've got a good one of these, which I passed on to another person the other day. It's called the trash pocket.
Oh, good.
And what it is my back left pocket on any pair of jeans I'm wearing is where I just put any trash I have lying around. Nothing wet, but, you know, like a piece of paper that you're ripping up, or the cellophane of a pack of cigarettes or something like that. You just put it in your back pocket, and then when you walk past a bin, you empty your pocket, right?
Good.
It sounds simple. I told my friend Grizz, who's a guitar tech, this, and he called me back about 6 months later and said, "You've changed my life." He was just like, he was like, I think about the amount of time I used to spend looking for bins with bits of paper in my hand. Those days are behind me.
Just have a you need to invent liners for your back left pocket, like mini bin liners.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Any books you recommend? Well, you've already recommended one.
Amnesia. Yeah, I mainly read history. I'm a massive history nerd, and a book I would recommend very highly is by Victor Sebastien, a book called Revolution 1989. It's a history of the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, and it was electrifying and exciting and profound, and I cried real tears several times in it. And it's a bit of history that's sort of not particularly well known currently, and I think more people should know about it. I don't do a lot of history, but the other day I listened to a podcast on Genghis Khan. I'm like, wow, he's amazing. Well, amazing in a certain way. Well, if you like death, he's amazing. If you're a fan of death and having lots of children, then he's the one for you. I read that book. It's well written. It's an easy, quick read, but it was also, it's so moving what happened. What's it like being famous? I'll tell you when I find out. Is that your answer? All right. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? I don't know. To accumulate experience and try not to fuck it up too much for anyone else. Oh, I like that. That's different. Yeah. And I like it. You're showing empathy again for other people, which is good. Is there an afterlife? I don't think so. There's, in fact, I'm going to quote myself. Oh, good. There's a lyric in because you know what I mean by Pascal's wager. No, go on. So Pascal was a French philosopher Pascal's wager said, essentially, you should believe in God, because if you believe in God and there is a God and you die, then that's fine. And if you believe in God and there isn't a God, then who gives a shit? You die and nothing happens. Right. But if you don't believe in God and there is a God and then you die, then you're in trouble. Right, okay. You see what I mean? That's called Pascal's wager, right? Okay. And there's a line in one of my songs which is, Pascal was a coward, never had too much stomach for gambling. That is the thing. If I don't believe in God and I don't believe in the afterlife, and if I die and I'm wrong, I'd like to think I would stand before my maker with my head held high and say, well, you could have made it a little less complex to believe or not believe. Do you know what I mean? For a start, just keep it to the one religion in the world, because that's the thing that troubles me, is it's like, this is the religion, this is God, or that's God, or maybe that's God. And it's like, why?
Well, the thing with me with the religions is I've never had one, so I don't understand a lot about them. But it was the fact that they come and go, that they go out, they die. And we had someone on discussing Roman funerals on Sunday brunch not so long ago. And at the time, Christianity was like a cult religion. It's like, what? And it's, you know,
well,
at one stage they didn't believe in it.
Romans wrong about their version of the afterlife, in which case, bummer.
I think if you got rid of everything, to all the books, all the churches, all the temples, everything tomorrow, how would, and you know, everything was wiped out. How would we know about how would we find out? What would come back?
I think there's inarguably a religious impulse in the human mind. I mean, it's ridiculous to argue against that. There's clearly something in our wiring that makes us want to interpret the way in a religious, interpret the world in a religious kind of way. And I'm sure there are things that I do that are slightly superstitious, and I certainly get that sense of kind of communing from a gig that other people get from singing in a church choir or whatever. But it just, to me, seems like the burden of evidence is on people who believe in an afterlife to prove it to me, rather than for me to disprove it.
Yeah, that's true. The only thing I think about religion recently is I've always been really anti-religion, if I'm honest with you, most of them, because, you know, as I pointed out earlier, I thought it's quite a strange thing, especially sort of you know, quite homophobic and all that sort of stuff. And then the other day I thought it's kind of like mindfulness for a lot of these religions. It's very peaceful. They often say a lot of prayers and a lot of chants and a lot of singing and all those sort of things that I think humans want to do. And I think the way that you can do it, it's also a way of, again, virtue signaling to people, look, I'm part of something.
Absolutely, which a sense of belonging is what humans need.
I don't belong to anything.
Yeah. My grandfather was a priest, and he was one of the wisest, kindest people I ever knew.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And he ministered to people during the Blitz who were dying and stuff like that. And like, I think you have to be a particularly harsh taskmaster to have a problem with that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm completely fine with people being religious.
Yeah.
And leave me out of it, thanks very much. But, you know, if that's what keeps people happy, then good for them.
Frank, it's been brilliant speaking to you.
Thank you.
Your album's out at the moment, isn't it? So,
yes, Be More Kind is out now.
Be More Kind, 7th album.
I'm going to plug the UK dates in January, February next year. We've got an arena tour. We've got our friends in Jimmy Eat World opening the tour, which I'm very excited about. It's really big shows. They're on sale now. Some of them are going to sell out quite soon. That's exciting. And send me an email or tweet at me. Yeah, where do people find you? You are actually just at Frank Turner, aren't you? I am at Frank Turner on Twitter. How did you get that? You were really early? No, I think we actually paid someone some money. At one point, I used to be like Frank Turner _1 or something like that, and somebody at the label decided that they should tidy that up. I spoke to will.i.am the other day, and he said, "What's your Twitter handle?" And I went, Tim Lovejoy. He goes, "Hey, how much did you pay for that?" And I went, "No, I got it free." And he goes, "You were at the beginning." And I went, "Well, not quite, but I did early adopter, and then you can get your own name." Which apparently, someone was telling me the other day that like it's a terrible will.i.am. Someone was telling me that somebody really famous. I can't remember who it was. Somebody really famous's email address is just their name at Gmail because they were the first person. Oh, that's really good. I can't remember. It's someone like Steven Spielberg or something like that. And if people want to email you, where do they find? My website is frank-turner.com because there is a preacher in Atlanta called Frank Turner who has it without the hyphen. Right. The so-and-so. But yeah, frank-turner.com, and there's a contact section on there, and it's in there. Excellent. So politics, whatever you want to chat about. Whatever you want to chat about, you can email me. Thank you so much again. Thanks for having me, man. It's been really good. Cheers.